Chapter 12. The Emperor remained at Lille decks during the 12th and 13th. On the 14th, he came to anchor at Basque Roads and sent again on board the Bellerophon, Mr. de las Casas and General Lalemant as bearers of a flag of truce. Explanations took place between those gentlemen and Captain Maitland on the subject of the conversation we had held with him 2 days before. He had been overtaken by the Slenny corvette, of which Captain Sertorius had the command. The bearers of the flag of truce returned to Lille decks on the same day and reported to the Emperor what had taken place on board the Bellerophon. Mr. de las Casas said that Captain Maitland had authorized him to tell the Emperor that if he decided upon going to England, he was authorized to receive him on board, and he accordingly placed his ship at his disposal. The offer coincided with the arrival of this corvette, which was then described for the first time. The Emperor sent for all those who had accompanied him, acquainted them with the captain's proposal, and mentioned the particulars of that officer's conversation with the bearers of our flags of truce. He added that previously to connecting them with his new destiny, he was desirous of informing them of what was going forward. The opinions of all were nearly unanimous respecting the confidence that ought to be reposed in the honorable reception he would meet with in the event of his adopting the resolution suggested to him. We trusted the more that the sentiment, as the English were fully aware of the means which the Emperor had at command, if he should determine, even by main force, to reach the open sea. If it were a question, said the Emperor, of marching to the conquest of an empire, or saving one from ruin, I might attempt a repetition of the return from the Isle of Elba. But I only seek for repose, and if I should once more be the cause of a single shot being fired, malevolence would take advantage of the circumstance to asperse my character. I am offered a quiet retreat in England. I am not acquainted with the Prince Regent, but from all I've heard of him, I cannot avoid placing reliance on his noble character. My determination is taken. I'm going to write to that prince, and tomorrow at daybreak we will repair on board the English cruiser. Everyone withdrew to make preparations for the departure. The Emperor wrote to the Prince Regent a letter couched in the following terms: Royal Highness, exposed to the factions which distract my country and to the hostility of the principal powers of Europe, I have closed my political career and, like Themistocles, am about to seek shelter amongst the British people. I place myself under the protection of their laws, which I claim from your Royal Highness as the most powerful, the most persevering, and the most generous of my enemies. General Gourgaud was appointed to carry this dispatch to London and received instructions which are of sufficient importance to be recorded, as they prove better than a volume of assertions what were the precise considerations which influenced the Emperor's conduct. My aide-de-camp Gourgaud will repair on board the English squadron with Count de las Casas. He will take his departure in the vessel which the commander of that squadron will dispatch either to the Admiral or to London. He will endeavor to obtain an audience of the Prince Regent and hand my letter to him. If there should not be found any inconvenience in the delivery of passports for the United States of America, it is my particular wish to proceed to that country, but I will not accept of passports for any colony. In default of America, I prefer England to any other country. I shall take the name of Colonel Murat or of Duroc. If I must go to England, I should wish to reside in a country house at the distance of 10 or 12 leagues from London, and to arrive there in the strictest incognito. I should require a dwelling house sufficiently capacious to accommodate all my suite. I'm particularly anxious to avoid London, as this wish must necessarily fall in with the views of the government. Should the ministry be desirous of placing a commissioner near my person, Gourgaud will see that this condition shall not seemingly have the effect of placing me under any kind of confinement, and that the person selected for the duty may, by his rank and character, remove all idea of an unfavorable or suspicious nature. If it be determined that Gourgaud should be sent to the Admiral, it would be more expedient that the captain should keep him on board his ship in order to dispatch him in a corvette, and thereby make sure of his reaching London before us. Napoleon. at Lille Decks, the 13th of July. 1815. General Bertrand also wrote a letter to Captain Maitland. I feel every wish to avoid this accumulation of authentic documents, but those which I lay before the reader are necessary towards fixing the opinion that ought to be entertained on the subject of the present negotiation. Monsieur le Commandant, Councilus Casas has reported to the Emperor the conversation he had with you this morning. His Majesty will repair on board of your ship by tomorrow's tide. At the hour of 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, I send to you the Countess Casas, a counselor of state, performing the function of Marechal de Logis, with a list of the persons composing His Majesty's suite. If, in consequence of the demand you have addressed to the Admiral, he should send you the passports requested for the United States, His Majesty will feel great pleasure in proceeding to that country. In the absence of those passports, however, he will willingly repair to England as a private individual to enjoy there the protection of your country's laws. His Majesty has dispatched the Marechal de Camp, Baron Gourgaud, to the Prince Regent with a letter of which I send you a copy, requesting you will transmit it to the particular minister to whom you may think it right to refer that general officer, in order that he might have the honor of delivering to the Prince Regent the letter confided to his charge. I have the honor, etc. 11th of July, 1815. General Gourgaud put to sea in the night from the 14th to the 15th and soon reached the Bellerophon. Captain Maitland received him on board and agreeably to the request made to him dispatched the general by the Slaney corvette, which immediately set sail for England, where it brought the news of the events that had taken place. During the whole of the passage, the general was encouraged in the idea that he might land and repair to the Prince Regent, but he had no sooner arrived in Portsmouth Roads than Captain Sartorius clandestinely slipped into his boat and reached the land without paying any farther attention to his promises. The general felt highly indignant, flew into a passion, protested, but was still detained on board. Whilst this act of deception was carrying on, the Emperor was preparing to remove from a land where plots were hatching in every direction around him. Matters had gone so far that he had scarcely commenced dressing when General Becker came in all haste to warn me of the fact of an emissary having just arrived at Rochefort with the mission of procuring the Emperor's arrest. He told me that he could suspend the blow for 2 or 3 hours, but that after that time he would not be answerable for what might take place. I instantly proceeded to the Emperor's apartment. I communicated to him what I had just learned. We hurried on his dress and took our departure at break of day to meet the boat which was to take us on board the English cruiser. We were followed by the captains of the 2 frigates, who had orders to hoist up the white flag and only waited to do so until the Emperor had reached the open sea. He soon relieved their impatience. He came down to the beach and embarked on board of one of the brigs of war which were anchored under the forts. He dismissed General Becker, who, agreeably to his instructions, was not to depart until he had seen him safely lodged in the hands of the English. He took advantage of the lowness of the tide to quit the roadstead of Lille Decks and to repair on board the Bellerophon, which was anchored in Basque Roads. It was found very difficult to reach the ship owing to the prevailing calm. Captain Maitland's boat with his first lieutenant came to meet the Emperor. The Emperor stepped into the boat and was unable to check his emotion when he beheld the tears of the greater part of the sailors of the vessel he was about to quit. These gallant fellows took leave of him with the customary acclamations of "Long live the Emperor!" and kept their eyes fixed upon him until he got on board the Bellerophon, where the captain of the brig came to take leave of him. The Emperor went on board the Bellerophon with perfect confidence, entertaining no doubt of his being allowed to enjoy the peaceful existence which was now the sole object of his ambition. He was received by the captain and crew with respectful silence. The vessel exhibited the most perfect order and cleanliness. The Emperor immediately repaired to the apartment of the captain, who had quitted it for his accommodation. A few moments afterwards, we descried the English line of battle ship, the Superb, having Admiral Hotham on board. He had come from Quiberon Bay to Basque Roads, in consequence of the information given to him by Captain Maitland, and after the lapse of a few hours, he cast anchor near the Bellerophon. Captain Maitland went on board Admiral Hotham's ship, where he remained a long time ere he returned to the Bellerophon. Admiral Hotham came on board shortly afterwards to pay his respects to the Emperor, and to request he would do him the honor to visit his ship the next day and condescend to breakfast on board. The Emperor accepted the invitation and accordingly repaired to the Superb on the following morning, accompanied by Captain Maitland and the French officers who shared his fate. The Superb was fully prepared for the occasion. The deck, covered with a tent splendidly decorated, was surmounted with the broad pennant of England. The daily labor on board was suspended. On the occasion, the crew were clothed in their Sunday and holiday dress. The sailors manned the yards, and an excellent band of music was stationed on the poop. The English officers told us that this ceremony never took place in England, except when the king repaired on board the ships. It is quite clear that Admiral Hotham, who had conversed with Captain Maitland respecting what had occurred previously to the Emperor's arrival on board the Bellerophon, would not have acted in this matter had he considered him a prisoner. For the English naval officers are as deeply versed in those matters as any statesman. Admiral Hotham presented to the Emperor all the officers and midshipmen of his ship, whom he named in regular succession. When the presentation was over, he took him to visit the batteries, and afterwards had a breakfast served up in as good a style as could have been exhibited in Paris. After breakfast, the Admiral observed that he had better come on board his ship, which was more capacious and comfortable than the Bellerophon, in which he would be confined for want of room. But the Emperor, with his usual kindness of disposition, replied that it was not worthwhile for a few days, and he would be sorry to mortify Captain Maitland, especially if the present circumstance was likely to forward him in his career. The Emperor was nevertheless aware that there existed a friendly intercourse between Admiral Hotham and the Prince Regent, who was partial to him, that this admiral was therefore less exposed to suffer any personal inconvenience than a captain of a ship, who is generally bound to passive obedience, whatever esteem might be entertained for him. The Emperor, however, was proceeding to England with perfect confidence, and did not apprehend that any unfriendly treatment awaited him there. Mere suspicion was repelled by the reception given to him on board the ships of that country. He returned on board the Bellerophon, which set sail with the Myrmidon corvette, that is to say, the only vessels cruising before Rochefort, up to the 15th of July, got underway at 8 o'clock in the morning. 2 days afterwards, we met the Swiftsure, a 74-ship gun ship, which was on its way to reinforce the cruisers. This was the first ship that had sailed from England, since it was known there that the Emperor contemplated taking his departure from Rochefort. That ship appeared to have been sent off in all haste, for it was only half painted and did not exhibit that remarkable cleanliness which uniformly distinguishes English vessels. On the subsequent days, we fell in with other frigates in succession, which were proceeding to the same quarter, but all those ships would have arrived too late to prevent the Emperor's departure if he had attempted to accomplish it by main force. We made this observation to Captain Maitland, whose ship was a dull sailor in a smooth sea. He told me in reply that he was so little mistaken respecting any chances we might have in our favor, that he had taken measures beforehand in case the frigates should have stood out to sea pending the negotiations with him. He had imagined that those negotiations had been opened with no other view than to lull his vigilance to sleep. He had therefore prepared himself for the event, and according to his own explanation, had adopted the following course. He selected about 100 of the bravest seamen on board his ship, whom he trained to the maneuver he had in contemplation. This was to bear rapidly down the frigates, overwhelm that which he might first come up with, silence its fire, run alongside, and send forward his chosen men to board her. Afterwards proceed in pursuit of the other frigate, and not give up the chase until he should have brought her to. Nevertheless, added the captain, contrary winds would defeat this plan. Even calm weather would save us from this grasp. Let us now consider what were the means at the Emperor's disposal, and compare them with those of Captain Maitland. He had not, indeed, any line of the battleships, but he had 2 frigates quite fresh from the stocks, carrying 18-pounders, even supposing that those of the Medusa were not 24-pounders. They were allowed to be excellent sailors. The emperor had, moreover, a brig and the Bayadere corvette, which was at the entrance of the Gironde. Since Captain Maitland himself acknowledged that in the then season he had cause to apprehend the wind might not be high enough to enable him to overtake the French frigates with his ship, which was one of the oldest in the English Navy, it is not unreasonable to admit that the emperor had some chance of escaping if his ship had succeeded in overtaking one of the frigates. Their difference of class had deprived us of all hope of defeating him, but the captain would have merely attempted to maneuver and gain time, and the safety of the other frigates would have been the better secured by the adoption of that course. It was not therefore the impossibility of taking his departure by main force that had determined the emperor to repair on board the English cruiser, where an offer had been made to receive him. I appeal this to the whole world, which has witnessed his glorious career. Is it supposed that he would have hesitated to run the chances of an action if he had felt any doubt of the good faith on which he had relied when he surrendered himself? His feeling of security was unbounded. The artifice used towards General Gourgaud gave him a moment's uneasiness, but the admiral declared to him that he had only detained the general because his own officers had got the start of him. This was sufficient. He so far trusted to what Admiral Hotham said to him that on his reaching Torbay, where the Slaney had already arrived, neither the quarantine flag nor the great number of soldiers mounting guard on board of her had the effect of undeceiving him. General Gourgaud came to report the refusal made of allowing him to land. I am aware of it, replied the emperor. The admiral has explained the matter to me. He did not allow you to land because you had already sent the dispatch by one of his officers. The general returned to the emperor the letter confided to him for the Prince Regent, and laid great stress upon the precautions taken on board the Slaney to prevent his communicating with the shore. The emperor felt reluctant to credit such a want of principle. He repelled the suspicions of his aides de camp. The English, on their part, were endeavoring to dispel them. They ascribed to the mere usage in similar cases the severity of the measures which had excited our uneasiness. Those measures were uniformly adopted towards all foreigners. We ought not to take umbrage at them. The fact, however, was otherwise. The true reason of what was taking place under our eyes was that no settled idea could be formed as to what determination might be adopted in respect to us. There existed such little suspicion of what was about to take place, even amongst the officers of the British Navy, that Admiral Keith, in congratulating Captain Maitland upon his arrival, wrote to him from Plymouth to Torbay in the following words: "Tell the Emperor that I shall feel happy at being made acquainted with what might be agreeable to him, and evince the utmost readiness in complying with his wishes. Thank him in my name for the generous attentions which be personally ordered to be shown to my nephew, who was brought a prisoner to him after having been wounded at Waterloo." It was on the day after the receipt of this letter that Captain Maitland received orders to conduct the Emperor to Plymouth, where Admiral Keith was to issue ulterior orders to him. He was at the same time enjoined to redouble his measures of precaution for the purpose of preventing all kind of communication with the shore. The Bellerophon arrived at Plymouth, and during the whole time of its stay in that harbor was surrounded in the evening of each successive day by a countless number of boats. To form a correct idea of their number, it will be sufficient to be told that it was found necessary to station the boats of another line of battleships and frigates in their roads as a guard round the Bellerophon. Notwithstanding this precaution, the boats filled with persons eager to gratify their curiosity were in such immense numbers that they bore the appearance of a close flotilla covering the surface of the water. They gradually hemmed in the guard boats, which were driven close under the Bellerophon. Admiral Keith came to pay a respect to the Emperor. He was still in ignorance of the course he was to adopt, and even expressed his anxiety for the speedy arrival of the orders he was expecting from London, which in his opinion would have the effect of procuring better accommodation for the Emperor than he could find on board a ship. Those orders soon arrived, but were of a very different complexion from what the Admiral himself had been led to expect. Chapter 13. Sir Henry Bunbury Under Secretary of State, was the bearer of the decision adopted by the English government in respect to the emperor. He came on board the Bellerophon, was introduced to this prince, and delivered to him not a letter, nor even a sheet of paper, but a mere slip, upon which were written in the French language, as nearly as I can recollect, the following words, which were, I think, an extract of a letter written by the government to Admiral Keith. As it may be of importance that Napoleon Bonaparte should be apprised of the intention of sending him to St. Helena, Sir Henry Bunbury is directed to make a communication to him to this effect and to notify him that he can only take 4 persons in his company, from which number General Savary and Lalemant are to be excluded, and that moreover the 4 persons who are to accompany him must previously acknowledge themselves to be prisoners of the English government. No signature was affixed to this writing. Those who had discussed its contents must no doubt have felt apprehensive of signing their names to it. Such a scrap of paper could be no introduction to the bearer. Admiral Keith supplied what was defective and made known the nature of Colonel Bunbury's mission. The emperor conversed with those gentlemen and declared to them that it was very far from his wish to go to St. Helena, and he had only come to England agreeably to the invitation given to him to that effect, and to the assurance that he should be in the full enjoyment of his liberty. Otherwise, he never would have dreamed of it. There was no fate he would not prefer to that which was reserved for him. He protested in the face of heaven and earth against the violence which was offered to him on board the Bellerophon, where he had been received under the protection of the British flag. He dismissed those gentlemen and wrote to Admiral Keith the following letter. My lord, I have read with attention the extract of the letter you have communicated to me. I have acquainted you with my sentiments. I am not a prisoner of war, but the guest of England. I came to this country on board the Bellerophon ship of war after having communicated to the captain the letter I was writing to the Prince Regent, and received the assurance that he had been directed to receive me on board and convey me to England with my suite if I should present myself for that purpose. Admiral Hotham has since reiterated the same to me. From the instant of my being freely received on board the Bellerophon, I was under the protection of the laws of your country. I prefer death to being taken to St. Helena or shut up in any fortress. I am most anxious to reside in the interior of England, in the enjoyment of freedom, and under the protection and vigilance of the laws, and to agree to any previous engagement and condition that may be deemed necessary. I neither wish to keep up a correspondence with France nor to interfere in any political matter. Ever since my abdication, it was always my intention to take up my residence either in the United States or in England. I trust that you, my lord, and the Under-Secretary of State will make a faithful report of all the details into which I have entered for the purpose of proving to you the right of my position. It is on the honor of the Prince Regent and the protection of your country's laws that I have placed my reliance, and still continue to rely. Napoleon. This letter remained unanswered. 1 or 2 days before Colonel Bunbury's arrival at Plymouth, an unfavorable opinion was already entertained of the turn which affairs were likely to take. The English newspapers gave an account of all the ministerial deliberations in which the question was discussed of sending the emperor to St. Helena. They also reported all that had taken place in Paris, that is to say, the king's entrance and the composition of his ministry. The selections he had made uniformly exhibited the names of the emperor's personal enemies. It was readily supposed that they would exert every endeavor to procure the adoption of some violent measure against their former sovereign, and would lay stress upon the impossibility of quieting France as long as there should exist any chance of his return. We were therefore of opinion that the measure about to be adopted in respect to the emperor was as much the work of the French as of the English. The officers of the Bellerophon believed it also, and were greatly mortified as Englishmen and as warriors at being made the agents of such an underhanded maneuver. They had all been well treated by the emperor. They had fancied him a man of wicked disposition, and they found him kind to excess. Their prejudices against him had accordingly given way to better sentiments. The emperor had made one of them dine every day at his table and had constantly invited the captain. This officer had pleased the emperor, who expressed himself well satisfied with his conduct. The midshipmen and Captain Maitland himself openly told us when they saw what was taking place, "This is a very bad business. If Whitbread were alive, matters would not take this turn. There would be a sharp discussion in Parliament." They advised us to protest against being sent to St. Helena because they thought that if we opposed the strenuous resistance to that determination, ministers would reconsider it before they rendered more flagrant an act which was already a direct violation of the laws. There were on board the Bellerophon a few persons who spoke very sensibly on the subject of the laws of their country, with which the English are better acquainted than we are with ours. One of those gentlemen advised us to resist. He even told us that we incurred very little risk in doing so, and could lose nothing by the attempt. I followed his advice. I wrote to Admiral Keith, and I heard mention of St. Helena. I knew not whether to credit the report, but without prejudicing in any manner the termination of his government, I warned him that it never could enter into my views to go to St. Helena, because I was not at liberty to dispose of myself to that extent. I had contemplated going to England or proceeding to America with the intention of getting my family to join me. I added that a transfer to St. Helena excluded such a supposition, which had not besides entered into my calculations. As I now thought it necessary to declare to him, I then dwelt upon various details connected with our arrival on board the Bellerophon. I am at a loss to say whether Admiral Keith ever answered my letter. I acquainted the emperor that very night with the step I had adopted. I also apprised him that I had found means of writing to Sir Samuel Romilly without sending my letter through the channel of the captain, to whom we were obliged to deliver our letters unsealed. It was on the day after I had written to Admiral Keith, or the subsequent one, that Colonel Bunbury arrived at Plymouth from London with the clause of exception relating to myself. As it was evidently not occasioned by any letter written on the previous day or 2 days before, it gave me some uneasiness, for whatever might have been the rights of my position, it was difficult not to ascribe some sinister motive to the measure which related to me personally. The emperor endeavored to calm my anxiety, but I think he augured as little good as I did myself from the clause. The Northumberland, which was to convey the emperor to St. Helena, was not in readiness for sailing. This prince was accordingly left in the same situation on board the Bellerophon in Plymouth Road until the 6th of August, when it set sail for Torbay in company of the Tonyan, with Admiral Keith on board, and a frigate in which were the officers who had come from France with the emperor. The Northumberland was to be in waiting at Torbay, to which place it had proceeded from Portsmouth under the orders of Admiral Cockburn, the officer appointed to convey the emperor to St. Helena. It was met at sea by 2 ships which had set sail from Plymouth, and all 3 came to anchor in Torbay in the afternoon of the 7th of August. Admiral Cockburn was on board Admiral Keith's ship when the emperor sent thither General Bertrand to ascertain from him in what manner he was to be treated during the voyage, as well as during his stay at St. Helena. The general soon returned and informed the emperor that he was considered a prisoner of war, as well as all the persons of his suite, that his money and even his arms were to be taken from him, and that the idea had even been entertained of depriving him of his sword. General Bertrand had loudly protested against such a proceeding. Admiral Keith had taken part with the general and pointed out to Admiral Cockburn that the sword of an officer taken prisoner on the field of battle was always returned to him, and the present case more particularly claimed the enforcement of that rule. He took upon his own responsibility to leave with the emperor the sword which he had worn with so much honor to himself. On the next day, the 8th of August, Admiral Cockburn came on board the Bellerophon with Admiral Keith, who appeared appeared distressed at being the bearer of so painful a message. Admiral Cockburn was accompanied by a person whom he had brought from London, and with whom I believe him to have been connected by the ties of relationship. This was the person to whom he committed the charge of visiting the Emperor's baggage. Every article was examined, one after the other, without excepting his body linen. The inspection was no doubt made in that considerate manner which softened the rigor of so disgusting a visit. But his money and every article of value were taken away. When the search was over, a message was sent to announce to the Emperor that the boat was in readiness, which was to convey him to the Northumberland. He embraced his companions in misfortune, who were afterwards allowed to go on board the Northumberland for the purpose of taking a final leave of him. He particularly enjoined me to tell Captain Maitland that he should have wished to present him with a token of remembrance, and regretted he had been deprived of the means of doing so. On the other hand, he retained no resentment against him for what was taking place, as that was connected with considerations over which the captain had no control. He did not believe that he would knowingly have deceived him. He had, on the contrary, found him so honorable in his dealings that he was persuaded he would be greatly distressed at observing that the confidence with which he had relied upon the protection of his flag had become a snare into which his unfortunate star had led him, and that he was particularly mortified at finding he had been made the instrument of the most disgraceful infraction of the laws of honor and morality, of every law, in short, which is held in veneration by the least civilized nations. At the moment of quitting the Bellerophon, Monsieur de las Casas, who I followed, the Emperor to St. Helena, requested Captain Maitland to sign a declaration respecting certain facts agreed upon between them when he had conferred together the Basque roads. Captain Maitland replied to Monsieur de las Casas in these words: "Consider from what is taking place what little advantage you can derive from my signature. It would only be productive of injury to me. Do you really suppose that my position is much better than your own?" We had now reached the 8th of August. The Northumberland set sail in the afternoon for St. Helena. On the same day, the Bellerophon and the Tonnant returned to Portsmouth. Chapter 14. Whatever motives may have influenced the conduct of the English government towards the Emperor, it has beyond all doubt acted a part at variance with the law of nations and with its own dignity. That government was not insensible to the claims which the Emperor's position had established in his favor, and it is probable that an anxiety to comply with the wishes of the allied sovereigns who so effectually contributed to his downfall had induced the English to violate the hospitality shown to the Emperor on board their ships, rather than a desire to avail themselves of a right which had ceased to possess that character after he had been received on board. The Emperor had caused a negotiation to be opened with Captain Maitland from the 11th until the 15th of July, in which latter day he repaired on board of that officer's ship. He did not adopt the latter course until after the captain had been authorized by his admiral to receive him. He reached England on the 26th or 27th of that month, and it was not until the 8th of August, whilst he was on board the ship, to which he had trusted himself in full confidence of protection, that they declared him a prisoner and stripped him of his property. Great stress has been laid upon a convention signed at Paris on the 2nd of August as the ground for annulling another convention which had been agreed upon at Rochefort upwards of 20 days before. This convention of the 2nd of August is nothing more than a decree of the allied sovereigns, who not only succeeded in obtaining that it should be carried into execution, but that it should likewise take a retrospective effect in its operation upon the English fleets. If the rights appertaining to the Emperor's position had been of a doubtful nature, they would be fully established by the recourse had to the convention the 2nd of August, with a view to contest them. What necessity was there, in fact, for resorting to the clauses of that act, if the English had considered themselves justified in depriving the Emperor of his liberty? It has been urged in reply that there had not been any written convention at Rochefort. This is certainly true, but quite immaterial to the purpose. Capitulations or written conventions are only used when the object in view is to surrender a fortified town or to determine the fate of a body of troops. The Emperor had ceased to appear in any other character than as a private individual, and it would have been deemed an insult to the party about to exercise an act of hospitality to stipulate any condition whatever. In such a case as this, generosity regulates the conditions and honor fulfills them. In order, moreover, to stipulate a written convention, Captain Maitland would have required 2 powers, and he had merely the approval of his admiral, because there was no other question than that of affording a passage to a private individual. It will presently be seen how little Captain Maitland expected that matters would terminate as they did on comparing the date of the notification made to the Emperor by Sir Henry Bunbury with that of the convention signed at Paris on the 2nd of August. It will be seen that Colonel Bunbury's message could not have been the consequence of it, since it had taken place at an interior date, and several days had also elapsed between his departure from London and his introduction to the Emperor on board the Bellerophon. The Emperor's reply to that notification bears the date of the 31st of July. Colonel Bunbury must therefore have left London on the 27th or 28th of that month. The ministers then were not acting in virtue of a convention already effected, since less of a convention entered into at Paris on the 2nd of August following. It cannot fail to occur to everyone that the English ministers were fully sensible of the rights inherent in the Emperor's position, as well as of the dangers they incurred in violating the hospitality afforded to him on board of the British ships, where their country's laws are exercised in full force in a case of that nature. But having determined to subject this prince to the harsh treatment which had long reserved for him, they sheltered their responsibility under the convention of the 2nd of August, which they were causing to be negotiated and signed in Paris, whilst they were carrying it beforehand into effect. To this circumstance is to be ascribed their having repeatedly interdicted all communication with the land. They no doubt hoped to oppose that the convention of the 2nd of August, to the reproaches of which they apprehended the consequences ere they had presented that important event to Parliament under an aspect calculated to bear them out in the course they had pursued. It remains for the English to consider whether their dignity has not been assailed and their laws violated on that occasion. If they should acknowledge this to have been the case, we may trust to them for indignantly hurling upon whomsoever it may concern the shame which has been attempted to fasten upon them. It is difficult to refrain from suspecting an additional motive for the anticipated decision of the English government. A comparison of the particular occurrences of the period in question will afford some clue to discover the motive of their conduct. The reader will recollect what I have already stated, that previously to the return from the island of Elba, Fouché had prepared an insurrection, which was on the point of breaking out, but was disturbed by that event. After the abdication of the 22nd of June, he neglected no means of driving the Emperor into the hands of the English by insidiously delaying his departure. If we ascribe his intercourse with Lord Wellington to no earlier date than that which he himself admits, the 15th of June, it is natural to suppose that the English general will have neglected no means of keeping up the illusions of so important a man as Fouché. He will probably have flattered his vanity with the hope that he would favor his projects in respect to the mode of government to be adopted. This is the more probable, as Wellington might be informed that in England the Duke of Orleans had already been thought of. The result of all this is that Fouché flattered himself he would direct the proceedings of the allied sovereigns, whereas he became their dupe. He had witnessed the return from Egypt as well as that from the island of Elba. He apprehended one from America. If the Emperor should succeed in withdrawing to that country and afterwards learn that difficulties were thrown in the way of carrying Fouché's projects into effect, it would be recollected that he felt no hesitation in saying to one of the Emperor's sisters that he should be put to death in order to save the country. I even think that Fouché had communicated his uneasiness to the provisional government in order that in any circumstance that might occur, the whole responsibility might not fall upon himself. This opinion is grounded upon the reply made to me by M. Carnot, which I have related in its proper place, when he said that so far from contemplating to retain the Emperor, it was wished to adopt every measure necessary to prevent his return. Calicor advised me at the time to make the emperor take his departure as soon as possible, but he abstained from dwelling any farther upon the subject. Considering all these circumstances, it is not venturing too far to suspect Fouché and his party of having, in imitation of Talleyrand, demanded the emperor's transfer to St. Helena as a preliminary measure, indispensably necessary for the success of the changes which it was contemplated to effect in France. He still fancied himself the director of events, and was far from suspecting that he was the mere dupe of others. He could not make to the English a proposal more in accordance with the projects they entertained against France. Had the cabinet of London wanted a further pretext to justify the course it adopted in respect to the emperor, it would have found it in Fouché's observations. This minister, who has during the whole course of his life substituted a spirit of intrigue to the elevated views by which a statesman should be guided, acted on this occasion the part of a madman or a knave. Plain common sense should have pointed out to him that the surest means of bringing the allies round to his views was to place them between the necessity of adopting those views and the danger of the emperor's returning from a country where he would have been in the full enjoyment of his freedom. He was not aware, like those who accompanied the emperor, how far it was from his intention to ever return to France. He might, while satisfying himself with this determination, affect to apprehend any other that was most calculated to bring the allies over to his own political notions. But his vanity and the agitation of a guilty conscience, in which hatred was still the predominant passion, so far obscured his judgment that he reserved no resource for himself in the event of any failure in the promises made to him, an assertion fully borne out by his subsequent history. It was the fate of France and of the emperor that should be the victims of Fouché and his satellites. The emperor departed with perfect composure and without exhibiting the slightest symptoms of ill humor. He distributed the greater part of his money amongst those who had accompanied him. The condition to which he was reduced would have drawn tears from the heart of a stone. He paced the ship's deck every afternoon and was treated on each occasion with the most respectful deference. I have related with the most rigid adherence to truth every circumstance that has come to my knowledge during that long and active career of glory which is unparalleled in the annals of history. The hero has fallen, and the sovereigns who entered upon a crusade to dethrone him have long since discovered that if he had not arrested the progress of the French Revolution, they would all have been hurled before him from their thrones. They were never beholden to him for what he had done in support of every monarchy, and such is the misfortune of his situation that it will yet be embittered by the reproaches of the very nations that had coalesced against him, when they shall have discovered that the hopes with which they were fed when they were called on to the struggle were nothing more than the snares held out to their credulity in order to exasperate them against France and thus accomplish the downfall of a ruler. They will call the emperor to a strict account for what they expected from him on behalf of the common interest without considering the obstacles thrown in his way. And as mankind is generally unjust in its judgments, they will forget that he abolished feudal laws in every country which he added to his system or to his power. They will demand of him why he abandoned the cause of the people to embrace the cause of kings, and they will add that the face of the whole world might have been changed after the battles of Austerlitz, of Friedland, or of Wagram, if the emperor had still had it in his power to do what would not have been difficult to accomplish for the first consul or for General Bonaparte, whose career was marked by the most lofty ideas. He will be styled a tyrant, and yet this was the very character he stood in need of. No man ever did so much good or met with so much ingratitude. Great stress will be laid upon the sacrifices which humanity had to endure and the wars which it was not in his power to avert. But no notice will be taken of the service which he exclusively conferred of drying up the sources of our civil discords and of arresting the torrents of national blood they had caused to flow. The most rigid severity will be exercised towards him as a compensation for the profound homage of which he was once the object. The bitterest reproaches will be directed against him by those who are habitually conspiring against his power and his existence. This will be much easier for them than the language of justification. In spite, however, of all these attacks, his brilliant career remains to defend him. It is exclusively the offspring of his genius, and his immortal works will long remain as objects of comparison difficult of attainment for those who shall attempt to imitate him. Whilst Frenchmen will consider them as the proudest records in their history, they will also serve as an answer to all those attacks which a spirit of revenge never ceases to direct against them. And when time, which analyzes everything, shall have disarmed resentment, Napoleon will be held up to the veneration of history as the man of the people, as the hero of liberal institutions. He will then receive his just meed of praise for his efforts to improve the condition of mankind. A correct idea will then be formed of the resistance he must have encountered. A proper distinction will be drawn between a dictatorship rendered necessary and a government ruling by the laws, between the crisis of a moment and the settled political existence which it was intended to impart to the nation. Lastly, it will be admitted that no one possessed in so great a degree as himself the means of rendering France happy, and that she would not have failed to be so had it not been for the wars into which his enemies had taken pains to involve him in order to obstruct his views for her welfare. It cannot be expected that the glorious epics of 1805, 1807, and 1809 will ever return. But if France should ever fall into that state of disorder which had preceded them, a supposition not wholly removed from the range of possibility, our posterity shall decide whether the punishment of transportation beyond seas should have been reserved for the emperor as an enemy of their happiness, or for those proud men reared in the midst of political agitations, whom he had found it so difficult to keep in check, and to whose intrigues he eventually fell a victim. Public opinion will then be as indulgent to him as it will be severe towards those political agitators whom he had the misfortune to load with his favors and to present to the confidence of the nation, and who, to gratify their private animosity or unbridled self-love, have sapped the foundations of the noblest edifice of glory upon record. Chapter 15. I shall close these memoirs by a narrative of what happened to the officers of all ranks who had followed the emperor's fate. It will afford a correct estimate of the motives which could determine the English government to extend measures of such excessive severity even to young men of 21 years of age. To those details I shall add personal notices respecting certain individuals who, having openly displayed their ingratitude towards the emperor, are not entitled to any consideration. May they one day be at a loss to find a country or a home, and reap all the opprobrium due to the treachery and to the blackest ingratitude. Previously to quitting Torbay, the captain of the Bellerophon received on board his ship the Englishmen who had come from London with Admiral Cockburn and had superintended the search made of the emperor's effects. During the short voyage from Torbay to Plymouth, we had, General Lalemant and I, a conversation with that Englishman respecting the singular exception of which we were the objects. We were endeavoring to penetrate the motives of it, which we fancied we could already discovered in the insertion of our names on the list of the general officers who were accused by the government of having prepared the emperor's return. This opinion naturally gave rise to the further one that the English government intended to have us conveyed back to France. We did not disguise from the person with whom we were in conversation the alarm we felt on this occasion. His replies were not calculated to allay our anxiety. He made use of the following expression: I neither hold any employment or possess any influence, but I have friends, and I shall be happy to be useful to you. If your apprehensions are well founded, you should lose no time in adopting the necessary precautions. You must be quick in your movements. I must here do justice to Captain Maitland's character. He signed a declaration for me stating that he had guaranteed my personal safety when he received me on board his ship, to which I had repaired of my own accord. He did the same for General Lalemant. I even wrote to Lord Melville, who was the First Lord of the Admiralty, and showed me his letter, in which he said that he had received us on board his ship after he had learned the personal dangers to which we might be exposed in consequence of the political events taking place in our country. He had afforded us the protection of his flag, and should consider himself as disgraced if we were taken back to France. This generous declaration proved of the greatest utility to us. I succeeded, notwithstanding the strict watch kept over me, in transmitting that document to Sir Samuel Rumley, a celebrated lawyer in London, with a request that he would cause to be put upon record the fact of my being on board the Bellerophon. And I declared to him that it was my intention to go to England, or to any other country except France, to which I suspected that the English government intended to send me back against my wishes.